Hello, Duncan here. Just a quick reminder that myself and Rob are going to be doing this podcast live at the Imperial War Museum on the 1st of November. We'll be watching 1917, we'll have a guest, we will definitely sign any of our books for you. You should definitely come along. You can get tickets from the Imperial War Museum website. That's on the 1st of November.
And Rob here, just to say boringly that if you would like to fill in our audience survey, that might help us to get a bit of advertising money, which would help to keep us in pizzas and war books and war movies. And the links for both of these things are on everywhere we can put them, but the link for the survey is bit.ly/warmovietheatre-survey. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to War Movie Theatre, where in the event of nuclear war, we'll emit a high-pitched squeal. Today, it's significantly less than 5 minutes to midnight, as a computer error sends a nuclear bomber on a mission to destroy Moscow. Can we shoot it down or turn it around? Or will we end up being overshadowed by Peter Sellers? That's right, we're watching 1964's Failsafe. I'm Rob Hutton, and I've been trained not to listen to anyone once I have my orders. Joining me is a man who thought this morning about bunking off, but will instead end the day in a frenzy of mass killing. Hello, Duncan Weldon.
Hello, Rob.
And joining us is a charming political scientist who seems perfectly nice. What exactly are those calculations he's got in front of him? Hello, Mark Pack.
Lovely to join you both.
Well, it's great to have you on, Mark. Mark is a regular listener. Are you still president of the Lib Dems?
I am for a few more months.
Right.
So, yes, you officially have a president on the podcast.
We have a president on the podcast. We also,
That's a
Mark,
first.
after listening to this podcast, Mark became a member of the House of Lords. And we can't guarantee that every listener will be similarly honoured, but, you know, do
Better
get in
not take
touch.
the risk, keep listening.
I don't think we haven't had a peer. We haven't even had an MP, actually. But
No. It's a day of firsts. Parliamentarian peer president.
And Mark got in touch, and I got in touch with Mark because I knew he was listening and said, is there a film you'd like to do? And you chose Failsafe, which is a film that I hadn't heard of, and I think, Duncan, you probably hadn't heard of
I'd
either.
never heard of it.
So, why Failsafe?
Well, I first came across Failsafe because of the novel that it's based on, which is by two American political science professors. So it was the one of them, Eugene Burdick, who is a person. It's an absolutely fascinating person because in his time he was really famous. Like, he's so famous he even featured in an advert for American Ale. And I've actually got the advert here, so I've got a little visual prop, which obviously will work brilliantly on audio. But
Well, we're putting it on YouTube now, so...
And he's in a scuba diving outfit. Who is the Ale Man? Undersea explorer, literary man, Ale Man. And with all due deference to lovely political science professors I know, that's not your typical political science professor. And, you know, if you look at that ad, you would think, well, that's Neil Armstrong or Sean Connery is the sort of it. So, remarkable person, interesting in all sorts of ways. He was involved...
I mean, just generally, the advice isn't usually to get beard up before going scuba diving, as I understand it.
Or doing political science.
When you're as talented as Burdick is, you can do anything. And I mean, he led an amazing life, very talented person, died tragically young of a heart attack when playing tennis in his mid-40s, and has just become forgotten since. And so he's become a little bit of an obsession for me, partly because he wrote a novel that is a fictionalized account of how opinion polling and data was used in the 1960 John F. Kennedy presidential campaign. So he's the sort of person that I just get really worked up about. I feel, look, you should know about him. If you're interested in politics, forget quoting the West Wing or Yes Minister or the thick of it. You should be a Eugene Burdick fan. So in amongst the other things that he did was he co-wrote this novel with Harvey Wheeler called Failsafe, and that got made into a movie. Unfortunately for him and his co-author, by pure coincidence, a Welsh office member of the RAF over in the UK, so the other side of the world, almost literally from him, around the same time wrote a very similar novel that also had the rights bought up. And
I'm going to stop you.
Film, but I'm not going to say any more.
Right.
No spoilers at this point.
I'm going to tell people the plot of Failsafe. It is available. It's available on... Actually, it turns out it's available on the Internet Archive. I paid to stream it, so it
I
is
got a
watchable.
second mover advantage in game
Yes.
theory terms by Rob after he'd paid for it, discovering it was free and telling me.
And it's available on DVD and all sorts of things. And it is, without going too far ahead, is well worth a watch. But the plot, it's in the 1960s. A US bombing mission starts accidentally. Bombers are flying towards Moscow, carrying a nuclear payload. There is no way to call them back. Henry Fonda is the president who is deciding what to do. Should they shoot them down? Should they work with the Russians? Should they, as some say, take this as an opportunity to just go all in and launch a first strike? Arguing for that is Walter Matthau as a slightly mad political scientist of German extraction. Fonda, in this film, decides to blow up New York instead as a sort of gesture of good faith. That's his offer, and he sends his old college friend, General Blackie, who is very much the moral heart of the film, to do this. Now, if parts of this sound familiar from a 1964 film, it's because of the 1964 film about accidental nuclear war that most, or if not all, of our listeners will have seen, which is Dr. Strangelove. I mean, I don't know, Duncan. Watching this, have you seen Strangelove?
I've seen Strangelove. I've seen Strangelove multiple times, but I had never even heard of this film, and it's released months apart, is it?
Yes. It seems to be. I mean, depends who you listen to. It seems to be a genuine case of sort of parallel inspiration, which is one of these things where, you know, sort of where different people who aren't in contact with each other around the world sort of have the same idea.
Look, step back a second. This happens in 1998. We get two huge films, Deep Impact and Armageddon, which are both fundamentally asteroid films about an asteroid hurtling towards the Earth. And they handle it very differently, but I can see how this can happen.
I've got both of the novels, and I was leafing through them last night, and it's really easy to lose track of which one of the two
I
you're
bet.
reading. I mean, they are so similar, the novels. And you know, as you say, I mean, you can have that artistic inspiration, and it's genuinely independent. There's a lovely example of this with John le Carré and Len Deighton, two espionage novelists. They have an opening paragraph each into one of their most famous books for each of them, which is almost identical. You can delete the character name for one book, insert the character name for the other, and it reads just as well. And nobody accuses them of plagiarism because it just sometimes happens that way, but it is really spooky. It is really spooky how similar the two are.
Both these books have their origin in late 1950s. Red Alert, which is the first one in print, it appears by Peter George, appears in 1958, and that's the one that becomes Dr. Strangelove. And Failsafe appears as a short story in 1959 and as a novel in 62. But one of the authors, I think probably Burdick, claimed that he tried to sell it originally in 1957. And just couldn't. But if you're sitting in the late 1950s, your nuclear war is a thing you might plausibly be thinking about. And if you're thinking, well, how would I tell a story about it? You know, an accidental start is an obvious sort of way to go. Nevertheless, if you watch it, if you know Strangelove and you watch this, really, gosh.
And on the DVD, the one of the little documentaries there is on the DVD version that I have has this I think unintentionally hilarious moment where it's talking about this legal background, and basically the message is that this is a coincidence, unfortunate, all got a bit messy, etc. But they then show some stills from the two films side by side. And again, they look so similar. And you just sort of think, what you're saying in this documentary and the images you're showing me are not compatible messages. And I think, as best we know, and some of the people involved are still alive, I believe. So I will definitely go for the innocent, that it is the innocent interpretation. But it is really, again, very striking. You could take the sort of command room in Dr. Strangelove and the command room in Failsafe look really similar, and yet at least the Failsafe one, and I think the Dr. Strangelove one, are not based on having been given special access. It's not like they're both based on the same thing that they both seen, and therefore they've come up with the same artistic interpretation.
You just have to believe just have to believe this is accidental and coincidence, because it being deliberate would be an utterly mental strategy for any studio to pursue. You can't say, look, here's a tremendous Kubrick film that's doing really well. Let's put out a carbon copy months later. No one is doing that.
No, well, so in fact, what happens is there is this amazing lawsuit where Peter George, who wrote Red Alert, actually, let's go back a step. Kubrick buys Red Alert, and which is by the Peter George one, and is trying to work out how to make it, and realizes that you can only really that it's very, very hard to make it seriously because it's also mad. I mean, obviously this is very real, but at the same time, all these people sort of sitting there discussing, well, maybe we should, now in a sense, well, if we've got one bomber flying towards Russia, we might as well send the rest of them. It's crazy. And I think because he knows Peter Sellers, at some point he just thinks, well, the way to do this is satire. It's just better as satire. And so that's how Red Alert, which is a very straight novel, becomes Dr. Strangelove, which is a very funny film. And one of the people, actually, it's interesting that one of the people they create this mad German scientist who is Dr. Strangelove, who I think is not in Red Alert and sort of has a past as a Nazi. And the parallel character is this sort of guy played by Walter Matthau in Failsafe, who had fled from the Nazis, but has the lesson that he has learned from the Nazis as a German, I presume, as a German Jew, is if you think they're coming for you, you get them first. And so he and the Strangelove character are sort of running in parallel. So Kubrick learns that Failsafe is being made into a film, and he and Peter George sue, and the settlement is out of court. And the result is that Columbia, who were bankrolling Kubrick, buy Failsafe and essentially put it out 8 or 9 months later, which kills it because everyone's seen Strangelove. And Sidney Lumet, the director of Failsafe, his take on this is, if you put the straight one out first and then the parody, it would have been fine. But if you put the parody out first, no one can watch Failsafe seriously because they've got the jokes in their mind, and so he's quite annoyed about the whole thing.
Although I think the passage of time has been quite kind to Failsafe, because now that we know much more about what really the people who were genuinely in command positioned at the time, so people like Curtis LeMay, so senior US Air Force officer, who, I mean, you look at his views now and you think, I mean, we are so lucky that he didn't in some way unilaterally cause a nuclear Armageddon. And so given the sheer horror that we know of some of the weird, strange, far too powerful personalities, actually the straight version is so much more powerful. There's a degree to it, almost Dr. Strangelove slightly trivializes the horror of what probably so nearly happened. And so I think, although Dr. Strangelove absolutely is the better film in all sorts of ways, actually Failsafe is the scarier film because the bleakness of the reality that it's trying to portray has, and it had a sort of second life around the year 2000 when George Clooney made for TV a sort of live broadcast version of it. And, and what I think that illustrates is a lot of the themes, which I'm sure we'll come on to, are still very resonant. And in a way, Failsafe feels like the more contemporary lesson in many ways, while Dr. Strangelove is the amazingly funny, brilliant satire, but it's about the past.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Clooney, of course, Clooney's a huge fan, and you can find video online of Clooney talking about this film. Yes, I think in a way it's one of these things where now you can watch it, and it's a few years since I've watched Strangelove. So although I was sitting there and you could see all the notes to the point where I think I paused about half an hour and I just need to check which of these came first, because it would make sense if this had come out in 1963,
yes,
and Kubrick had said, no, that should be a funny film. I am going to rip the piss out of it, and I'm going to make Strangelove. If that were the story, you go, yeah, absolutely. We were watching Airplane last night with the kids, which sort of works more or less today, I'm pleased to say, but one of the things I was aware of is that my children were completely sort of unaware of all of the films that it's mocking.
Yeah.
So it works on its own level. But if you sort of grew up watching all, Airport 77 and that kind of thing, there's a whole other level to it. But
I guess we're getting to the fundamental question here, which is, would Star Wars have done as well if Spaceballs had come out in 1976?
Is Spaceballs a war movie?
Given where you've taken this podcast with definitions of war movies, I assume there is going to be a Christmas special edition looking at the Star Wars movies.
We're gonna do Star Wars. I've decided. It's got war in the title.
But no, back to the topic at hand. I messaged Rob yesterday, and obviously, whenever I message Rob about a film, he tells me I've got to save it for the podcast because he's far more disciplined than me, which is correct. But I wondered if this is better than Strangelove. Now, I haven't seen Strangelove in 10, 12 years. It's funny, isn't it? Because it's such a similar topic, and it's visually so similar. But you're right. Strangelove is a dark satire and very funny at times, whereas this is just... I think the first thing I messaged Rob after I'd watched it was simply wowzer.
Yeah,
because
I watched it yesterday morning and sent Duncan a message saying, have you seen it yet? Because I thought that if he'd seen it, he'd surely have said something.
Yeah.
It's quite a...
whoa! It's a heavy film. It's a heavy film. It's a big ending. It's really well delivered. It's a tremendous bit of cinema, I think.
Well, also,
and I'd never heard of it.
It relies a lot on the audience, which I really like. The film trusts you. So you don't, there's no music score in it. The deaths that feature they are horrible because of what your imagination does, what you are thinking at the time. It's not what is being sort of drilled into your ears or your eyeballs by the film. It's what you are meant to take away from that moment. And I think that that in a way shows the skill of the director in particular, that willingness to trust the audience. But I suspect it does mean some people, particularly if you're a bit, say, psychopathic, you probably watch the movie and don't think very much because you don't have that moment of empathy at those key moments where you think, oh my goodness, what has just happened?
One of the things that he does very well, a moment we'll go to the after action report, but Sidney Lumet sort of breaks into cinema with 12 Angry Men, also stars Henry Fonda, also stars Henry Fonda as a figure of just unimpeachable righteousness, the man you'd want on your jury if you were on trial for if you were wrongly accused of murdering someone. Indeed, actually, you might want him on your jury if you were rightly accused of murdering someone, because he can clearly talk them round. And Lumet is incredibly good at these. 12 Angry Men is basically a one set film. You don't get any of the what these people were doing this morning, what their lives are outside, except that you do start to. It sort of fed to you through the film, and you suddenly start to realize that all of these jurors each of them is his own man. And you get his baggage. And with this, you get a little sort of opening kind of vignettes of these people's lives, which you could have cut. But on the other hand, they completely, because you suddenly, with Blackie, the Air Force general who's so worried about all of this, it opens with him waking from a nightmare. And you see why it is. You suddenly understand much more about him just from this little scene with his wife, where he's really not talking about anything very much, but at the same time...
I was going to say, the other thing that really struck me watching it was, it deals with really, really big themes, and it's based on a novel, and yet it feels very theatrical, the way it's been staged. You're right, reacting to Rob's, I think, all of that at the beginning really helps build the character very, very subtly. But most of this is just people having conversations in rooms or briefly what is, I presume, a flight simulator they've got as the cockpit. But it's mostly just people having conversations in rooms, very, very well shot. And it's strange to take a novel and make it feel like a play in cinema.
Yeah, I mean, Strangelove is actually, I don't know if it's quite on the London stage at the moment. It has been on the London stage recently. Armando Iannucci and Steve Coogan have sort of taken it to the stage. So obviously that can be completely taken to the stage. And this could be too. You could do it. But what you'd lose is I think you'd cut the sort of the opening 20 minutes, and that would be such a shame. because it's this, and there's this little vignette with. Well, let's go at this point to the after action report. Quick, Dad, they're on the cable car. When do you want to be called in? I mean, you don't have to call me in.
It's those vignettes. You want it's not that long. It's just shy of 2 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. You could cut that opening 15, 20 minutes, but I think you wouldn't lose much of the plot. But I think you'd lose an awful lot of the film and your enjoyment of it. And I think this is one where you want to sit down and watch from the start.
There's an amazing scene right at the opening where an Air Force colonel has been sort of summoned away from what is it, SAC they call it, the sort of the base in the middle of the mountain, and we don't know why he's been summoned away, but he's summoned to some domestic drama, and then a general has to go and get him because they've got a dignitary visiting. So the general drives up and finds this colonel arguing with his parents, and the colonel's father has got drunk and had beaten up the colonel's mother, and they're living in this sort of squalid flat, and the two of them then drive back together, and you've got this great shot where the general is sitting next to the colonel, and you can see the general twice think, I'm going to say something, and then know that he doesn't know what to say. What are the words of comfort? Because the colonel's acute embarrassment at this personal sort of shame and trauma being seen by his superior officer, and you're a colonel in the Air Force, you've got away from all of that, and you're being dragged back to it. And that scene, I just think you could show that, teach that. It's so well done. And then when you then have drama between the two of them later, you remember that. And when Blackie is general is told that he's going to be the one that's got to go and fly a bomber over New York with bombs in it, New York, where his family is. If you just said, but my wife and kids are down there, in fact, he never says, but my wife and kids are down there. But we know, we know that he likes his wife and kids, which is not always sort of. So yeah, you could skip it. And actually, the weird thing was, because I was watching very early in the morning, and it's summer holidays in this house, I was in fact, my son came in halfway through, having woken up, and they don't always sit down and join me, but he did sit down and join me. So this is quite interesting, and he could get it if you just joined for the last hour. It all made, I just had to say, bomber flying to Moscow, and okay, right, I get it, but actually, if you don't have the early stuff, I think it's a lesser film. I mean, so having said that, we'd like to be called in at the start. It's sort of there's verifying the order. It's slightly hard to break it up into scenes because they're all in the same place.
Yeah, it feels like one long scene almost.
Yes, you've got Walter Matthau. This is our chance. History demands it. His first kind of right. The hotline scenes are also all amazing and very cleverly done.
Acting is just brilliant. I mean, I could watch some of those scenes multiple times because the actors have so little to work with. When you've got the president and the translator sat, a desk, phone, there's a jug of water or a coffee jar.
There are no props, tiny room.
Nothing. And also, they're not looking, they're doing what I imagine happens in real life. So the president is concentrating on his phone call, and the translator is sat next to him, sort of listening, intently translating, but they're not therefore speaking to each other most of the time. And so you've got two actors with almost no props, not looking at each other in close up. I mean, it is an absolutely brilliant piece of acting by, both by Henry Fonda and by J.R. Ewing of Dallas fame, Larry Hagman, who is
yes. So young Larry Hagman may feature in a later category, who plays, and the way that this is, sort of for people who haven't seen it, Hagman is translating what the Russian president is saying to him. So inevitably, you find yourself comparing this to Strangelove. The way that it's done in Strangelove is sort of Peter Sellers on the phone. And the way that it's normally done in films, yes, Yuri, yes, no, I'm well, Yuri, pause, and so on. It is, whereas with this, you never see the Russians get. Hagman's job is to translate what the Russian president is saying in response. And so Hagman, as it were, is speaking fairly neutrally for the Russians. And so they have this odd conversation where they are talking to each other, but they're not exactly they're obviously they're acting against each other, but it's not like it's an odd sort of not quite confrontation.
And I mean, you wonder how Larry Hagman was sold on the role, because said, look, okay, we'd like you to play in this role. There's not really going to be any props or anything. The camera's just going to be close up on you. You're not allowed to look at the other person that you're with most of the time. And you're not actually saying your own words. So you can't give, you've got to say them as low key, sort of, no dramatic pauses, no varying intonation. You've just got to be low key, consistent. Almost every ability to show any acting skill is sort of drained out of you by the setup. And yet he manages to use his facial expressions in, a way that, I had never thought of him as being such a talented actor. I also like to imagine that the story arc where Buck, the translator, does become so disillusioned by the events of the film that he goes maybe back to Texas, becomes a full-on capitalist, and he becomes JR later in his life. It's a plausible story arc, I would argue.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of the best bits, particularly for somebody who is not, known for being a, high-quality Shakespearean stage actor. I think it's just one of the most brilliant acting performances I think I've seen, punching above your weight, as it were, in a film. I would happily watch his scenes many times.
Apparently, the Lumet approach was he didn't, with actors, was he let you get on with it, and you sort of he'd tell you if he thought you weren't doing it right, but he basically, apart from that, sort of, okay, can you do it a bit faster? That kind of thing. He wasn't so he let the actors find it.
Yeah.
And which work, obviously it works with someone like Fonda. Fonda's great in this, but Fonda's doing the Fonda thing. It's sort of like we need an actor who is going to play the president, and everyone who sees this has got to think, oh yes, that's the president I want. That's I feel because you need, especially in a way, because what he's going to do is so bonkers at the end that it can't be somebody who is a bit bonkers. It's sort of you need to be somebody who can sell the idea that this.
And that's sort of the genius of the film, because the actual ending is, as you say, bonkers. And I'm really curious. You had a child, your son that came in with an hour to go.
He thought it was bonkers.
Yeah. In the cold light of day today, thinking about the film, it's bonkers. Yeah. When I watched the film yesterday, it seemed less bonkers. And I think, that's the product. That's a product of 110 minutes or whatever it is of good filmmaking and good storytelling.
Yes, yeah. Fonda can sell it to you, but I mean, Hagman is astonishing in all of these scenes. As with some of the films that we do, which Duncan and I haven't heard of until someone suggests them, when you then start researching, you discover that there is a little online community of people who are really into this stuff, and there is lots of good stuff online about how that filmed. The way that you go sort of from 2 shots to 1 shots and this kind of thing, and the way that you sort of you're shown Fonda. You then get in this sort of these odd series of scenes where I'm going to call it SAC because I think that's what that is. Where at one level they're helping the Russians shoot down their planes. At another level, when one of their planes, because they're watching on their big screen, when one of their planes shoots down a Russian plane, they all cheer because they're Americans. American, they shot down a Soviet. What are you going to do? And then they've got the scene labeled "You can't fight. This is the war room." It's quite hard to pick a moment to be called in. I think that the other scene that is absolutely terrific is just towards the end, where they know basically that maybe they've got one shot, maybe they're going to be able to stop this last bomber from getting through. You've got the generals, the Russian general and the American general having this conversation. You can hear the Russian general in that, can't you? Yes, you can.
Yes, because you get the unexpected plug for modern urbanism about how the best cities are the ones that you can walk in.
It's all a 15-minute cities thing.
So I think that scene would be slightly spoiled if you came in for it, because if I remember rightly, the photo of the American and Russian officers on the phone to each other, and the American officer, one of his assistants, brings him a file with a photo of the person he's speaking to. I think that's the only time we see a Russian in any film. So, and I think the power of that moment would be diminished if you haven't, up till that point, realised I've not seen any Russian yet.
No,
but it is a great scene.
that's it. Yeah. And he's with his family, and again, it's the moment that's unsaid where you can see the general. He's about to ask whether his family, because the American general asks, are you out of Moscow? And the Russian general says yes, he is, and he's about to ask, and then you can see him think, no, because your children aren't out of Moscow, are they? All these bits with these people sort of wrestling with these horrible, awful decisions are incredibly well done. I think you completely believe that. So you've got them chatting about walkable cities. You've got Walter Matthau standing up in the Pentagon, and he's done some calculations, and he wants to talk about how they're going to get corporate documents out of New York if it's bombed. Which is like, oh yeah, no, I don't think And Matthau's sort of supposed to be the ultimate realist. Another level, you think you haven't understood what's happening at all.
Yeah.
And you've got Henry Fonda and Larry Hagman talking about the weather.
Yeah.
And all of those are believable. Just like, what do you talk about as Armageddon approaches? Oh, it was sunny this morning, wasn't it? Yeah, apparently it'll be windy later, So that's great. That's great. But yeah, I think it's worth, this is a film it's worth watching from the start.
Yeah. 100%.
Although I must say, the opening dream sequence, I'm a huge fan of the film. I'm not nearly as keen on it as either of you are. So I guess if anyone is listening and decides to start watching it and that initial scene puts you off, I would say carry on. Carry on. It's well worth pushing on. I think in the book, the dream sequences with the bull work a lot better because there's much more space for the characters to sort of be fleshed out.
But I don't love the bull, but I love the talking. I think the stuff with talking to his wife and all of that works.
And just tucking the sheets on the bed for his kids. It just that you need that sense of how much he loves his family for the horror of what he does and what happens to him at the end.
And you don't know that he's an Air Force general. I mean, obviously, anyone listening to this will know he's an Air Force general until he opens. He's just a man waking up in New York after a nightmare, and he's got to go to work, and then. And he's discussing whether he will go to work, and maybe he should just, and then he opens his wardrobe, and there's all of these Air Force uniforms, and he's, right, and actually that way round, sort of, he's just presented to you as a bloke in his pajamas, which, we all are. That is really cleverly done, which takes us quite neatly to She's Not So Dumb. Are there women in this film? To which the answer
sort of.
Yeah.
Well, the first proper dialogue is from a woman, isn't it? Because you've got the crowd cheering with the bull dream sequence. You've then got Blackie's heavy breathing as he wakes up from but actually the first dialogue is from his wife, and then you've got the scene where he goes to the airport where he doesn't talk to anyone. The next scene with people talking, which is the overrunning sort of late night dinner party. Yeah. Again, it's a woman who speaks. So it gets off to a strong start with female characters, even if it does fade somewhat.
Well, I mean, there's more women in it than there are in 12 Angry Men. Yeah, I mean, sort of until right at the end, you get the sort of the pilot's wife is brought in to scream at him. I mean, actually, that's the other moment where my son said, why doesn't, because the idea is supposed to be that they don't know who these people are who are yelling at them down the radio that this is all a mistake and they have to turn around. And my son said, why doesn't she just say something that only he would know? And it's like, I think there are things that my wife could say to me and I go, that's my wife. What do we make of the woman in Mattau's car? That's the one bit of these opening sequences that I didn't think I quite understood. There's this sort of woman who obviously sort of is hoping to seduce Matthau after this late night. I mean, who has the energy at sort of after 6 o'clock in the morning after an all-night dinner party? And he says, I'm not like you, because she's sort of... What is going on there? Does anyone have a view?
So I thought I knew what was going on when I rewatched it ahead of this podcast, and then decided I didn't when I had watched the rest of the film, because there is a point there in that scene where Matthau, who appears to be the reasonable one, because the woman talks about the beauty of nuclear war, and in fact, he slaps her in response to that. A bit of a troublesome moment there. But the fact that he is repelled by the idea of somebody talking to you, that seems to set him up as quite a nuanced character. But you really lose all of the nuance. When later in the film he's urging a first strike on Russia, it's as if... So I wonder if it was just sort of left over from a slightly different version of the screenplay where the Matthau character was a more complex personality than, in the version that we now see. It's also odd because I don't think it's... Again, I tried to find the scene in the novel, and I don't think there is a scene like that. I think that is a creation purely for the film.
Yeah, but that would make sense, actually. Yeah. It's a I'm afraid it's a war movie with wives and mothers and and strange women in cars. The casualty list.
Well, depending on how we're counting it, but
I don't know. How do you count these things? I could argue that the casualty list is, one bull and one human who killed himself.
I've got a version of that. There is another version.
There is another version that has quite a few more.
What was the population of New York and Moscow in 1964 would be?
Yeah. Yes. I think we can say at this point that this film ends with wiping out 2 global cities, and it sort of has to. So one of the novel, I can't now remember which novel it is because they're both so similar, but one of the novels at least ends with war averted. The Russians managed to shoot down the bomber or something.
Red Alert, the Kubrick, which maybe is partly why Kubrick was inspired to do the satire, because the ending actually of Red Alert, I think, is a little bit of a letdown in that sense. It's a bit like the ending of what is it? H.G. Wells's
The War of the Worlds.
Novel about War of the World, where it just... I guess it's okay to give spoilers,
Yeah, I think if you don't know how the War of the Worlds ends, sorry.
110 years. I mean, it's fine, isn't it?
They can't get on with the Earth's atmosphere. It's a real letdown of and Red Alert as well. I think it's a little bit of a letdown. Oh, just turned out the bomb failed, so everyone's okay.
Yeah, I think... I increasingly think it's one of these, it is a version of the Chekhov gun thing. If you send a bomber to Moscow, it has to drop the bombs, and indeed, if you send a bomber to New York, you have to drop the bombs on New York. And that final scene again, it's one of these things where they have no special effects, and indeed they get no cooperation from the US military at all in this film.
Fancy that.
And not only do they get no cooperation, but there's obviously a sabotage operation, because when they go to get sort of stock footage of planes, they're told they can't have it, and so they've got one shot of an aeroplane taking off, and they just use it over and over again, sort of quite skillfully, to make it look like it's an entire flight.
Yeah, and that bit is done really well. I've rewatched that bit a few times, knowing that it's the one plane, the one bit of footage. And it really doesn't look like it. Sometimes you definitely feel like you can see how it's just the 4 planes, and that they're reusing. That bit is really clever. Bit of, I guess there's a bit of zooming and cropping as well to give you
they're
slightly different angles. But really well done. And it's a low budget film. Again, on the director's commentary on the DVD makes quite a few references to how low budget it was. But I don't think it doesn't feel like that at all at any point.
Yeah, all the money will have gone on Henry Fonda, and the set, as you say, and it's Henry Fonda and the SAC set, which is expensive and complicated because it has 1962's version of computer graphics and this kind of thing. So that they spent a lot on that. But it ends, instead of showing sort of a bomb or anything, it just it has these little shots of New York street life, and then and the countdown to detonation.
Yeah.
And then it ends on this sort of horrible sort of atonal sound, which is they've sort of decided that squeal is the sound of nuclear war having happened, and which goes through the titles, and
very similar in that sense to the perhaps the most famous political ad of all time, which is this era as well, the Lyndon B. Johnson's advert when running against Barry Goldwater, the Daisy Girl advert, which is that countdown. Now, And I think it's quite an interesting contrast because the Daisy Girl advert, so famous, so controversial, only shown the once, ends with footage of a nuclear explosion. But in a way, I think that's less emotionally impactful than the way the two cities are destroyed in this movie. And perhaps for a political ad, it has to be a little bit more crude in your face because you've not got, you can't build up to it. But it's a remarkably, I guess it's a good reason why artists should be kept short of money because it brings out the best of them.
Some of them. And Daisy Girl would have aired that year. I mean, within months, because it's a 64 campaign, isn't it? So
and so Failsafe is released. I think it must be a few weeks after the Daisy Girl advert.
It's November. Failsafe is November, and November would have been when the election was. And I don't know when Daisy Girl appears, but
it will have been before polling day in the election, one presumes. Otherwise, that would be another famous other story about.
I mean, at the time this film comes out, 18 months after the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, it's you can see why Hollywood might commission 2 such films after October '62.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I don't think we can complain about gratuitous American characters.
But there is one.
Go on.
Well, it's so cliched. So in that early scene where there's the visit to the US Air Force officer's home with his mum and his dad, when they come out, the 2 US officers then come out and go into the car, there is this person shambling down the street. It's easy to miss, but it's so cliched of sort of homeless bum wandering down the street as if you need reminding, this is seen in the US. So it is a bit gratuitous, that little extra performance, I think. So it's a bit of a stretch, but the Cooler King runner-up award, perhaps.
Yes, Shambler up. Well, I think we've sort of got to the answer to this already, and introducing who's in this. Larry Hagman is not a name before this film, I think, and I imagined that his agent was sort of you would be taking this round and saying, look what Larry can do,
Yeah.
Although
I don't think he then went on to do anything that really, his career went off in a slightly different, very successful, direction. But it feels like this is almost the other path his career could have taken.
He's not introducing, but on his way up in this is Walter Matthau. And this is one of his last films as a villain. Because he's had this long career at this point where, I don't think of him as a tall man, but he's a tall man and he's got this sort of craggy face. And so he has been playing people in some way a bit like this, sort of villainous people, not the heroes. And then someone realizes that actually he could do comedy. So he has not at this point done The Odd Couple. I can't remember what the film is before The Odd Couple, where they realize that Walter Matthau actually can be funny. But it's a weird one watching it if he's in your mind principally as a humorous actor, because he's not in this at all, and he hasn't yet become that person. But so he has already at this point, had a sort of a busy old career, including, Duncan, you'll be pleased to know, in the General Electric Theatre.
Oh, there we go.
Introduced by Ronald Reagan. He's bought it, Sarge. Best death?
I would go for the EU ambassador in Moscow, who I think is uncredited. So he's called Jay, isn't he? His name is used by the president at one point. And I couldn't see a J in the credit, which is odd because given it's a speaking role, I mean, you never see him. And he only says, I think, 3 sentences in the whole film.
The sky is lighting up.
Speaking roles are normally credited. But it's just such a powerful moment that you just have 3 lines from the ambassador, the squeal on the phone, and you know that several million people have then died. It's very, very powerful.
It's a whole thing where they're getting people on the phone who are going to die and telling them you're going to die. I mean, never telling them, as it were, but just like just so you understand, Jay. There's a bomber on its way, and you're on the top floor. Are you? I don't think you're.
Moscow during the Cold War, obviously, always a foreign service professional as ambassador. This is not a man who's, regretting making some campaign donations.
Yes, you do want someone who knows what they're doing. Good luck. The best meme. Any nominations?
Well, the plug for 15-minute cities, the greatest cities are those. I think if you saw that as the meme, you might be a bit confused as to what the rest of the movie's about.
I Mark, the one I thought you might go for is I'm not a poet, I'm a political scientist.
I mean, I guess the one that is most resonant is the president when he says, "We both let our machines get out of hand."
Mm.
That feels, with the rise of AI, a very...
Yeah, so that's the weird thing about this, that's sort of, here's a film from 63 years ago that suddenly feels, the bit of it that feels really current is all this stuff about, well, the computers are running projections and they're telling us, that we have to do this and this kind of thing, which, given what we know about 1963 computers, is like, they're probably not really, are they? But now it feels very current now, when we've got, this sort of, these computers that we're trusting, even though we can't really trust them. They're making stuff up the whole time. So yes, that's a sort of, that's a weird echo back. Stiff it up a lip. I mean,
I think it's got to be the Russian rep to the UN in New York, because it's just completely... I mean, you just think, pity this poor chap. So the plan is, the US president is going to demonstrate to the Russian president that he's genuinely remorseful about a whole load of Russians having been killed by him. And his plan to do that involves him killing the Russian rep to the UN in New York. And you just think, that Russian rep would say, look, Mr. President, Premier, I understand we need to do this. But the best way you can be sure, Premier, that the US president has done what he's promised is if maybe I just travel a little bit outside of New York and find...
I'll watch.
And you sort of think... a plan that demonstrates contrition over killing Russians by killing another Russian feels, that's a stiff...
I mean, if I was the UN ambassador of the Soviet Union, have we thought about Chicago?
New York really equivalent to Moscow? Well, and indeed, Blackie going off to bomb, to kill his family, and Fonda. It has to be said as well that Fonda never refers to this, but the First Lady is in New York, so Fonda is absolutely sending a bomber, to finish off Mrs. Fonda. It's all quite stiff upper lippy, it has to be said. Nastiest Nazi. I mean, the Russians aren't really bad in this,
given how little we see of them, they're humanized to quite a significant extent. And I think, deliberately, particularly given the number of people involved in the film in some way with sort of left of centre political views, the number of people who have been blacklisted who are involved in, I think it's deliberate that the Russians are humanised.
The screenwriter is blacklisted. I mean, I don't think this film works if the Russians aren't humanised. I think you have to have that. There's a moment in it where Matthau says, "Oh well, the Russians won't fight. If we bomb them, they'll surrender." I just think it's such an odd thing for someone to argue in 1964. With someone saying, "Oh, the thing about the Russians is they'll give up if they're attacked, and it looks like they'll lose." It's like all of you are old enough to know that is not what the Russians will do if they are attacked and they think they'll lose, even if Moscow is destroyed. We know what the Russians, we know that the Russians will fight.
Though he does have other comments, which I do think do more neatly just classify him as the nastiest Nazi, don't they? Because, like when he says, those who can survive are the only ones worth surviving. I mean, that's pretty... And I do, I mean, I wonder whether somebody would sort of dare quite put the same words into his mouth about the Holocaust now, because it is pretty problematic when he says, how long would the Nazis have kept it up, General, if every Jew came after had met them with a gun in his hand? I mean, victim blaming is never a non-problematic thing, and to be doing that, so he does come over as a pretty darn unpleasant character. There is, as you mentioned earlier, there is the hint that he is Jewish. I think in the book it's made explicit that he is Jewish, but I mean, he trying to talk rationally about having millions and millions of people dying and somehow there being an outcome from that in which you're the winner. I think that's a fairly uncontested prize.
And he's the weakest element of the film, I think. I see what role he's trying to serve in the film, but he's done almost so cartoonishly at times in his views and his arguments that I think it's the one thing that detracts. He feels more like a character from Strangelove than a character from this.
But isn't that because the Herman Kahn, who's the real person that he's based on
thermonuclear war and all,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, one of Khan's quotes was, if 180 million dead is too high a price to pay for punishing the Soviets for their aggression, what price would we be willing to pay? I mean, is that not your cartoonish brought to? So maybe that's the problem, is that you say he's implausible because he's actually being based on real people who slightly scarily were as implausible in reality as,
Again and again, you circle back to why Kubrick thought this only works as satire. These people are too nuts to be serious somehow. But so I mean, talk more about Herman Khan if you want.
Well, I mean, I think the other thing about Khan is that for all that he is this horrific character, where you look at some of what he said, you think, I mean, he or defenders of him would say, but in a world in which nuclear weapons exist, what other way is there of thinking about these things? He is in a way a sort of cartoonish extreme character, but it's in a context in which, unless you're just gonna sort of run away screaming and hide under your bed, this question about, well, if one side launches nuclear weapons, would you retaliate or not? That was a real thing. And I mean, I think what's interesting is what we now know is how dove-like even the coldest of Cold War warriors were. So we now know that the instructions that, for example, Margaret Thatcher left, the sealed envelopes that every British Prime Minister writes, the instructions she gave the British nuclear submarine force was not to retaliate, that if Britain was wiped out by a Russian attack, to not retaliate. We know that Ronald Reagan, I mean, his proposal to Gorbachev in one of their summits to try to remove nuclear weapons was more dovish than the dovish of dovish Democrats. I mean, no Democrat politically would have been able to survive getting anywhere close to the sort of disarmament proposal that Reagan offered. And so, you do have these people who, for all of their sort of quite hardline anti-communist, in that horrific scenario of thinking through what does a nuclear holocaust really mean, their thought processes went in all sorts of unexpected and, in a way, extremely humane direction. So the problem here is, in a way, not the film or the character. The problem here is reality. Reality is just grimly and strange and horrific.
Khan is slightly unusual in being a physicist. This film is set in the 60s. The 1960s, particularly the first half of the 60s, is really sort of the peak period for political scientists, economists, game theorists coming to Washington to do these senior national security jobs and applying this sort of social science mindset to the problem of how you deal with these crises, how you fight a nuclear war. One thing that I always find really interesting, the book, who was it, Barbara Tushman's Guns of August, about the origins of the First World War, which comes out early 1962 and is very much not that. It's not a work of social science. It's a work of a narrative history and popular history, and very, very good. Kennedy read it over the summer of 1962, and when you go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis stuff, Kennedy is obsessed by, look, I've just read this book about timetables and decision making and how the First World War broke out, and I'm trying to avoid that. And he's being told constantly by these sort of technocratic defense and State Department and military men, no, this is what's happened. Here's how we've got to escalate. And Kennedy's saying, if we escalate like that, what do the Russians do? And they say, well, they escalate like this. And it's just, that complete, that mindset. And this is all just before this film is made.
Yeah, and actually, you can see that kind of, oh well, no, but these are the tracks. The tracks have been laid down, Mr. President, and the train has to run along them. Is very much in both Strangelove and in this. That's the underlying thing is that somebody does it. Got a manual, and when this happens, we do that. And actually, although we keep talking about this sort of blowing up New York as horrific, it's also you are plausibly given the case in this film that is the way that you avert a much worse war.
Yes.
And that actually that is Fonda's genius move to stop. We'll just lose one American city and we'll just lose one Russian city, and then everyone will sort of put their guns down and back away. And this will save Chicago and Washington and San Francisco and LA, and and in rather the way that Kennedy in the Cuban Missile Crisis sort of finds an alternative route to allow everyone to back down without losing face. Dan Busser's dog prize for the most problematic moment. Matau slapping The woman in the car. I think we're cutting that.
Yeah.
I say it in the remake. There is a remake of this, and I haven't seen it. Have you seen it, Mark?
No. I don't think I thought I had, and then I was looking on my shelves because I thought, oh well, let's give that a rewatch as well. I was looking on my shelf for DVD. Next to Fargo, there's only one fail-safe DVD, so I may have watched it on streaming or something, and I forgot. But it was done live. It was, it was sort of done as an anniversary thing in the style of old school TV. So it was done as live. I think if it was done live from a sort of TV studio, I can't imagine you wouldn't have a scene with the car. Just it does. So I think it must. Yeah, I think it must not have been in the remake.
Loose Lips, best lines. I
love the politician. Obviously there were quite a few politicians, but the one who is known just as Congressman Ruskub, I don't think we ever even get his first name. He's a politician. Politician is his first name. His line: "The only thing everyone can agree on is that no one is responsible." This is your political soundbite for the ages.
Yes, yeah. There's the Fonda final conversation with the president. We're to blame, both of us. We let our machines get out of hand. That's very much the message of the film. Is don't let your machine and your machines, both as machines and in a sense people who have been turned into machines, because the whole thing is the pilot, the bomber pilot isn't sure he's doing the right thing, but he's been trained just to follow orders. And he's been trained to ignore the president on the line because it might be someone in touch. And he's been trained, as it were, to ignore his wife pleading with him. That is, in a way, a machine out of hand. Broadsword Radio. Completely implausible moments. I think I'll just read at this point. Duncan, did you make it all the way to the end of the titles?
No, I didn't.
Well, I'm just going to read to you what comes up.
Yeah.
The producers of this film wish to stress that it is the stated position of the Department of Defense and the United States Air Force that a rigidly enforced system of safeguards and controls ensure that occurrences such as those depicted in this film cannot happen. So there you are. However,
seeing that reminded me of a sign that was stuck up on a tree near where I live recently, which is a sofa for sale, sort of, worth £350, £550. And then the sign said, "Not stolen." And it feels like it doesn't give me confidence. I think I'll have two other implausible moments. One is when the pilots open their sealed orders as to where they're meant to attack, and the orders is simply a piece of paper with in large letters written on it, Moscow. I've never seen any official nuclear attack orders, so I might be wrong, but it feels like. But the other that really intrigues me is the computer graphic. Well, they look like computer graphics on screen, which are actually produced by it was animation done by John and Faith Hubley, who are 3 times Oscar winners. So they really know their stuff when it comes to animation. But you look at the turning circle of the planes as depicted on the screen, and also the way that the American satellites can detect the location of every Russian submarine. Where there's a whole load of detail there, which when you've got what some of the generation's best animators doing, just it's a bit. You sort of think this is a bit,
Well, that this screen would exist at all in 1964. In fact, if you've anyone's watched 13 Days,
I was about to say, if you look at the moon landings,
the 13 Days is the Cuban Missile Crisis film, with Kevin Costner, which is really good. And that, as it were, what they actually have in the Pentagon is a huge map and things stuck to it. That they move around as these ships move around. That's what they had in 1960. They don't have these screens, and that American radar can somehow penetrate deep into Russia so that you can see where these, where all these,
and tracking individual sort of air-to-air missiles and so on.
Yes,
Some of that is obviously for artistic effect, but I think things like the turning circles and so on, just given you've got such good animators doing it, that's surprising that they thought, "Oh, forget it. Well, authenticity doesn't matter at this point."
Yeah, well, and they apparently tried to get pictures of Strategic Air Command, but they couldn't. For some reason, they couldn't. And that does look. I think that's so. Ken Adam designed the war room for Strangelove, the Bond set designer, I think. And this one is also very well done. It is slightly, sort of, well, okay, we've seen Cape Canaveral, we kind of trying to imagine what these places might look like. And you end up getting it.
There is a James Bond sort of slight touch, not just to the set, but the way that each time the nuclear sort of readiness escalates, another set of people all walk in synchronized
I
silence.
know.
It's very much like the extras in some of those James Bonds of denouement scenes, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's like, what are those guys just standing there in that closet waiting for the thing to escalate?
It's very odd.
Yeah, no, that rang slightly false as well. Actually, if we're being picky, judgment at Nuremberg. Well, is it a war crime if you didn't mean it?
Is it a war crime
Can't
if you're
commit
not
war
a
crimes
war?
against yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I think it feels like with two cities being nuked, somebody should get done for war crimes.
Yeah,
But
somebody's going to the Hague,
I
right?
wouldn't want to put a novice lawyer on their first day at the War Crimes Tribunal on this case, because it requires a bit of work to land the prosecution, doesn't it? Because one was a mistake and the other was self-inflicted. So
Yeah.
there's a bit of a defence there, but surely that we got to find something to get somebody for.
I'm not sure that the Americans subscribe to the International Criminal Court when it comes to their own people, so maybe it's fine. Duncan, is this the operation that changed the course of World War III?
It's what I find interesting about it is this is, and Strangelove in its own way, this is a very early mid-60s film, clearly based on a novel written in the 50s, because it's 10 years later. This doesn't work because you've moved to a world of intercontinental ballistic missiles with 6-7 minute warnings, and the most talented director in the world can't fit all of this drama into 6 or 7 minutes before the missile impact. We're still in the world of the weapons being delivered as they were, at the end of the Second World War by dropping them out of a plane, and that's what gives you the space for this drama. There's a bit. I will plug the book. Yeah, I've got a bit about the bomber gap in the book and perceptions, and roughly at the time that the bomber gap is the one that comes before the missile gap. So the bomber gap I find absolutely fascinating. So it starts in 1954 with what can only be described as a really poorly sourced piece, which looks to be writing about rumors from something in Aviation Week, which says that the new Soviet jet bomber, the M4 Bison, will be capable of taking off in the USSR and delivering a nuclear attack directly onto American cities. I want to be absolutely clear, at this point, there is no evidence this is true, other than it's in Aviation Week. But you get questions asked in Congress and it gets picked up by everyone else. The M4 Bison, to spoil the story early, never actually works. Like eventually they turn it into a refueling aircraft because its range is awful.
Okay.
But the Soviets can see what's happening in Congress. They can see the American establishment panicking about this. So in 1955, and I just love how simple this is. 1955, they've only got 10 of these Bison built so far, but they can see the US is panicking about them. So at the big victory in the Great Patriotic War parade, they get the 10 Bisons to fly over, circle around, and fly over again.
This sounds like a plug for my book as well, actually.
Yeah, then 8 of them come and fly over. The US are utterly convinced they've built 28 of them rather than 10 in the time, which is where the bomber gap comes from. They start projecting forward at this run rate and just have this terrible. It gets better though, because the US then send a plane to have a look at Leningrad Air Force Base, and this is a few months later. It photographs 30 Bisons on the runway. The US Air Force then multiplies 30 by how many Soviet air bases there are which have long-range bombers, come up with a number, oh my God, they've got hundreds. At this point, the Soviets actually have 30, and they're all in Leningrad. They've put them where they can be photographed easily. So you've got this absolute panic in the US about Soviet bombing capacity. Now, the end result is they commission the B-52s, which are meant to be the answer to the Bison. The Bison never actually exists as a long range bomber. It's just not up to it. Whereas the B-52s, I believe they were using to bomb Iran, earlier this year. They're still in service decades later. But this is sort of the context
Yeah.
of this sort of, we then move on to a missile gap, and the Kennedy administration campaigns really hard on closing the missile gap, and McNamara's first weeks in office are really, really awkward because his first priority is to close the missile gap, and it becomes apparent to him within weeks that no such missile gap exists. So there's then all of these excellent Pentagon papers of them sort of saying, what the hell do we do now? Because we've just won campaigning on a missile gap. We've said the first priority of our Pentagon is going to be to close the missile gap. We can't say there is no missile gap.
Mark, what would you advise at that point?
That is an interesting challenge. Just as a digression, given your level of aeronautical detail, Duncan, I'm slightly disappointed that you've not complained that at one point one of the planes in Failsafe seems to feature some Israeli Air Force marking.
Yes.
Which is a whole for military pedants is a very confusing plot twist, I suspect. But I do think there is a degree to it, following things like, those sort of scares that you've talked about, Duncan, the way, that also the continuing fear of nuclear war by accident, whether it's an accident initially or whether it's politicians misjudging, is part of what informs, Ronald Reagan's approach to things like the Star Wars Defense Initiative and trying to basically militarily spend the Russian economy into bankruptcy. There is a degree to which this is part of the story about how the Cold War, plays out and ends up with Russia sort of bankrupt and communism falling. And in particular, the way, as I touched on earlier, Ronald Reagan is in some ways remarkably dovish. I mean, he's obviously very hard line, lots of very anti-communist rhetoric, huge defense spending and all sorts of other things. But he also has a genuine fear of nuclear Armageddon.
Yeah.
And he does try to agree with Gorbachev a deal to rid the world of nuclear weapons. So I think there is a degree to which this is part of the story of how the world ended up avoiding blowing itself up in the second half of the last century.
It's interesting. I mean, I thought a couple of true diversions into history that we were doing. One is Operation Chrome Dome. Are we aware of Operation Chrome Dome? 1961 to 1968, that was we know about continuous at sea nuclear deterrent. This was continuously in the air nuclear deterrent.
Oh, yes.
Which is having bombers flying with nuclear bombs on board so that they can be easily diverted to Moscow if the need arises. Of course, what happens is that these planes crash periodically and they've got nuclear weapons on board, and Wikipedia lists 6 crashes.
It's one off the coast of Spain, as I recall.
One in Spain, but the one that ends it is in Greenland. That's a really bad one, and it's like, essentially these are more dangerous than they're helpful. I think also probably by 68 you're moving to a world of intercontinental missiles anyway, and so having these things in the air is just so. You think, oh, well, I would say again, the United States Air Force has a rigidly enforced system of safeguards and controls to ensure that occurrences such as those depicted in the story cannot happen. Well, all I will say is that the Wikipedia list of nuclear accidents in the Cold War is longer than you think it will be. And those are just the ones that we know about. Also, Able Archer. We know about, which is going to what you were saying, Mark, about Reagan. Although you're right, Reagan actually, is the leading force for disarmament. That's not the extent to which this is poorly understood by his opposite numbers is really important. So, well, before Able Archer is the NATO exercise of November '83, which is a NATO exercise which the Russians think might be real, and NATO don't realize that the Russians think that until Oleg Gordievsky, who is a KGB officer who goes over to the British, tells one of his key pieces of information is, you don't know how much my side thinks that your side is really, finger hovering over the button. And once Reagan and Thatcher understand that really informs how they deal with the Gorbachev. They hadn't grasped that because it just seemed bonkers. September 1983, the Russians detect an incoming ICBM. And they're talking about things on rails. Their protocol is absolutely rigid. If you detect a launch, you have to do a full-scale retaliatory launch. Yeah. And Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov is the man who saves the world. because he says it's probably a malfunction, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's a very good film called The Man Who Saved the World about him. I mean, I think it's possible there were other bureaucratic steps in the process that had he not said, no, this is not real, I'm not going to escalate it, that maybe the world would have been saved. But it feels very scary that we, rely on, and yet, he is, I mean, it's a fascinating film. And as you said, Duncan, there isn't the time in the actual sequence of events for the sort of plot that happens in Failsafe or whatever.
Yeah.
But my goodness, it does feel like an awful lot happened in those very few minutes.
What would a rogue category today? Because I found myself thinking, what is the right double bill with this film? I mean, the obvious double bill is Strangelove.
Yes.
And I'd actually, if there is a cinema that wants an evening double bill, do this and then Strangelove, probably that way round. That's not the way they'll do it, because they'll do the bigger film first. But this and then Strangelove will be a really interesting 4 hours.
Actually, 13 days, when I think about it, is not a bad. It's not a bad shout.
War Games was the one I found myself thinking about.
Yes.
Which is one I would also love to do on the pod sometime.
It,
Mark, come back and do War Games.
No, that would be great to do. That would be really, that one occurred to me as well, as did The Man Who Saved the World, because that's the thing. But actually, I think the fun one to do, and I think you are not going to have heard of this film, even though it features a Tom Lehrer song. So, maybe it's not, you're not thinking, it's called The Gathering of Eagles.
Nope.
Also released in 1963. And this is, as it were, the US military's official counter-propaganda. So Curtis LeMay, the sort of senior airman, who really didn't like all of these films and all of these novels and all of these accounts, basically have essentially saying, "Oi, you lot aren't really in control of, what you're up to, etc." So he decides to cooperate with the making of this film. So full SAC cooperation, you get real footage of B-52s in the film and so on. You get a Tom Lehrer song. And I think it's safe to say the film is not very good. I've not watched it in full. And actually, the bits that I have watched really bring home the difference between a director that's really on top of their game with a brilliant screenplay and other films.
I'm looking at the poster right now. It's not screaming good film to me.
It is the contrast of, the official version of how brilliantly run the Air Force is with the nightmare version that we get, in Dr. Strangelove and Failsafe. So I think for a properly artistic evening, you need the contrast, don't you?
Worth dying for. How does this film stand up? I mean, you're the only one of us who's seen it repeatedly, Mark.
Yeah, well, so I think, yes. I mean, as you will have gathered from my enthusiasm talking about it, absolutely. Well, one of the reasons I think it is worth rewatching is that some of the themes about machines being in control are still very resonant. But I think another reason is that Lumet's directorial sort of style is deliberately very low key. He says at one point that he doesn't want people viewing his films to notice what he's doing. And so it's quite easy. He doesn't want you to notice all the clever things, and therefore rewatching allows you to really enjoy and revel in the skill with which this film is put together. So like the way that it relies really heavily on fixed cameras angled up and close in on people's faces, and the lighting of those faces gets more dramatic through the film. And that's the sort of thing that you probably don't notice on first watching, but you can, or the way the Hagman Fonda scenes, the way Fonda's stillness of his face offsets with all of Hagman's twitches. Again, you just, you don't notice that first time. So I think it's definitely got very high sort of rewatching value. And also, the thing that I love about films like this is, I think the fiction that I find most interesting is the fiction that tells you something interesting about the real world. So all of the backstory with Dr. Strangelove, the 2 novels, Eugene Burdick, the advert for American Ale, there's a whole rich hinterland. You could watch it on a Friday evening and spend the rest of your weekend reading up or watching or listening to things that trigger from it. So rewatch it repeatedly.
Yeah,
more so than one of the other films that are featured on this podcast.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was a genuinely great film. I mean, I'm not going to rush to watch it again myself. I probably will watch it again at some point, but I will definitely recommend it to people, and I recommend it to all listeners. And like Rob said, you can find this on the Internet Archive for free. It's less than 2 hours. it's a really good way to spend 2 hours.
Yeah, actually, and it's not. It engaged. As I say, it engaged the teenager who doesn't mind watching things in black and white. It's a sufficiently interesting. There's things to talk about afterwards, as I think we've demonstrated as we approach the 84th minute of this podcast. I really, really, really enjoyed it, and I have to admit, I was slightly resistant when Mark. I was like, can we do another film that nobody's heard of? But
well, the other one I suggested was even more obscure, although it was a straightforward, proper war movie.
I can't remember what that was.
And like Russian front. It was a battle on the scene from Barbarossa, from earlier the German invasion of Russia, which is a great film for all sorts of other reasons.
Well, come back. You can come back. But no, I really, really, really enjoyed it, and I'm really glad I've seen it. Both as a bit of Cold War history and as a movie in its own right. I've enjoyed other Sidney Lumet films, and this one just disappears because of Strangelove, which is a great shame. So thank you so much, Mark, for suggesting it and for coming on.
My pleasure. It'd be great to have a chance to eulogise about the film to someone else.
And thank you as ever, Duncan.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you to everyone for listening.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks to everyone who's filled in our listener survey or signed up to come and join us at the Imperial War Museum on November the 1st. Next week, it'll be love and betrayal in the desert as we watch The English Patient.